Hello everyone, welcome to Week 5, Module 5. In our past weeks in the course, we have explored performance management systems at large. We've looked at the importance of vertical and horizontal alignment, types of appraisals, motivation theories, how we can use information technology to enhance our performance appraisal systems, and lots of do's and don'ts. You've been exposed to many theories and frameworks. So this week we focus on the actual feedback session itself, and in doing so, you will apply the knowledge gained thus far in the class by pretending that you are in the role of a general manager. And you will share what is most likely unwelcome news to a sales manager who reports to you named Darcy Gallagher. That application is due at the end of this week on Sunday night as usual by midnight. However, before then we still have some reading material and some tips to share so you will be ever more prepared. And since we want the feedback session to result in motivation to change, we will also review how to set a SMART goal or even smarter goal. So you will apply that with Darcy too. At the end of the course, you will also design a SMART or smarter goal for yourself. So you will get some practice in this activity before you will need to do that in week 7. Our learning outcomes for the week: by the end of this week you will be able to apply key methods and practices of giving feedback, evaluate the role of coaching and effective behaviors of coaches, design strategies for difficult feedback sessions like the one with Darcy, and create SMART or smarter goals for future planning of performance appraisals. So feedback. One of the readings last week, in it we looked at different types of discussion sessions. And in that article it referred to them as interviews. So we use the words interchangeably, either a discussion session, a feedback session, or an interview. This week we will share a few suggestions that you can consider for most of those types of interviews or discussions. If you anticipate the person will be defensive, you'll want to think about your approach even more. For example, in the first portion of the interview, you'll watch for signs through body language or verbal clues as to whether the individual is being receptive or defensive. That will help you decide on how much you want to control the interview or discussion yourself, or how free you want to be with being open-ended in the first few minutes. We have to be careful about those first few minutes of the interview. An interview or discussion can get away from you if you let that portion go too long. And if a person is being defensive, they may want to take over the interview before you can share what you want to accomplish in it. But in most situations, we would, during the interview, encourage employees to talk, and then you listen in a very proactive manner to their critique of their own performance. And engage in small talk at the beginning to put the person at ease, but again, we don't want that to go too long. Sometimes managers giving the performance feedback get nervous and they engage too long in that small talk because they don't want to get into the more difficult portions, but you have limited time and attention during that period, so just be mindful of those first few minutes. But it is good to set the person at ease and yourself at ease by chatting a little bit in the beginning. And then you will want to identify the employee's strengths and weaknesses and discuss and agree upon them. Sometimes we can focus too much on the weaknesses or too much on the strengths, so we want to balance those. And then at the end you conclude the interview, and you will most likely need to have a follow-up developmental session where you will plan the action for improvement. I recommend that we not hold the feedback session at the same time we're then trying to agree upon goals for the future. It is taking a lot of energy from you and the person receiving the feedback, so give it a rest and have the two conversations in two separate meetings. It'll be worth it. So let's switch gears for just a moment. How about you're the person who's receiving the feedback? I know that we've all been there. I think it's good that we remind ourselves every now and then as we're receiving our feedback that those that we're giving feedback to are feeling the same way that we do. And usually that means that we're a little apprehensive even if we expect the very best of interviews. So what if we're the person who's receiving the feedback? First of all, we want to be open. Even if what we're hearing is not something that we agree with or may be negative. We do not want to cast blame on others or the situation. So let's just take the information and for what it is and go from there. It is okay for you to ask questions of clarification regarding the data that you're being given or the expectations that have been set in your role or any of the information that's being given. You'll ask for questions of clarification, again in a non-defensive manner, but just to gain more information. And if it's something that you disagree with, you may want to say very, very nicely, thanks for the feedback, but I don't agree with it all. And then give your reasons. Or, I have a different view of my performance, and here's why. You'll know your manager better than anyone else, so you'll know how to address your disagreement with them. And you'll want to give objective reasons, and again, you'll not be casting blame on others, but give objective reasons without being argumentative or disrespectful. And this would relate to whether a person is sharing what needs to be developed or your strengths. You may not see the strengths in the same way as your manager, so you can ask for clarification on that too. And just as we do if we are giving a performance review, we may want to schedule a follow-up meeting. And particularly if you're disagreeing with something, you may want to have time to think about it and gather some facts that might support your own self-assessment. Earlier in the course, I recommended that we all keep a me file or attagirl or attaboy file, and this can be a digital file. This is a record of our accomplishments, notes from our coworkers or customers or anyone else who's sharing the praise about our work. Our manager may not be aware of all of the great things that we're doing, and they may need to be reminded, and we may need to be reminded. If asked, finally, if asked to sign the performance appraisal instrument, although you disagree with it, know that you can always add a statement that shares that you do not agree with the assessment, but that you have read it or that it has been reviewed with you. Signing the document does not mean that you agree with it, only that it has been reviewed with you. And you may want to take time in the interview or the session to express any desires that you have for training, development, or promotions. You'll have to be the judge of whether that's the right time and place. I recommend, as I've mentioned, a separate meeting to be set up for any plans for development or action planning. But if this is the only time that you're going to see your manager for a long period of time, you may want to go ahead and mention that you'd like to speak further with them in a follow-up meeting with your development or maybe your goals for promotions and such as that. Again, it'll be up to you, but that time has been designated to be your time with your manager, so make the most of it. This is what is known as the developmental interview. This is where you'll be preparing for conducting a developmental interview with the employee. This usually follows that performance appraisal that has been given. So ideally, after the performance evaluation is completed, we would then begin preparing for the interview based on the areas of improvement that have been identified. Although you as a manager and leader are very busy, holding this separate formal developmental interview and spending time developing our employees can lead to increased performance and most research has shown lower turnover. So once again, small talk to begin the interview, and we have to be mindful, we don't want to go too long, but that small talk in the beginning not only sets the employee at ease, but you too. So you then agree on the developmental objectives, so those areas that need to be developed and what they are. I also suggest that you take time to talk about why these objectives are the important ones. We need to understand how our behavior impacts others that we're working with and the whole organization. Remember that vertical alignment that we want to have and that horizontal alignment that we want to have. So this is one of the most important parts, to agree on the areas that need to be developed and the objectives or the goals for each one of those. What's it going to look like when the goal has been achieved? And then we want to look at behavioral outcomes that we want to improve and be able to increase the rating in the next review. So plan how to best achieve those goals. I suggest working with a smarter goal. You may have another method. I know I push smarter goals pretty hard in this class, but I think they're important because sometimes we set goals that are just very general, and we never know whether or not they have been improved. The area has been improved because we don't put in measurements. So I'm a big believer in SMART goals because it adds that added detail. I suggest that we keep the number of objectives or SMART goals between 1 and 3. Sometimes just one area that is really key is all that we need to concentrate on, because of course the person has the rest of their job that they're doing. So just one can be very helpful. But between 1 and 3, I don't believe that we should try to tackle more than that, because then we maybe are too ambitious, or maybe we have not been maybe we haven't chosen objectives and goals that are critical. So between 1 and 3 is what I recommend. And then we conclude with some positive encouragement about reaching the objectives, and then setting a follow-up meeting to review progress. So after we've had that feedback session, then we've had the time to create the new goals. We don't want to just leave it for another year. We want to schedule maybe every month, maybe every quarter, to have meetings to review the progress. Just as a final note, if at all possible, I think we should allow the employee to design their own objectives and strategies for improvement. But you may need to nudge them in the right direction. You may need to help identify those areas of development that are most critical, not only to the employee and to you, but to the organization. And you'll probably need to agree on allocating time or funding to devote to maybe training or development, or some other costs that might be involved in achieving the developmental goals. I want to look a little bit at a special type of session, which is evaluating and diagnosing problem employees, or problems that are related to employees, performance problems. We don't have problem employees, we only have problems that are associated with their behavior and their results. You'll recall that in the Gabrero and Hill article, Managing Performance, in Module 4, it suggests 3 steps. I'm sorry, more than 3 steps. It is several of them. So first of all, we want to be timely. We don't want whatever it is that maybe that we have observed or have been tracking. We don't want it to be too very long after we have seen that particular behavior or have known about it. So we want it to be timely. We want the discussion to be descriptive and specific, again, not too general, and we want it to be given, the feedback to be given without the use of subjective, general attributes or reasons that we feel the performance is being demonstrated. We want our conversation to be oriented toward problem solving and action, and not too very much about the past. Remember, the trends are that we are looking toward developmental processes for our employees. So enough examples that are help the employee understand, but then we want to orient our time toward problem solving. We may need to go through a cause analysis, the root cause of the problem, and then moving on to action. We want to be sure that we set aside enough time for this conversation. We don't want to have to end in the middle of the conversation. And we also need to keep in mind that if we're using a performance appraisal form or 360 to give feedback and to begin the evaluation and diagnosis of the problems that are related to the employee, know that you do not have to just go line by line, category by category, and let that form dictate the way that you're having your conversation. Know in advance the key points that you want to make and the key critical areas you want to address. You may want to take some notes and have an outline for this. You may not have the time to review everything, so we want to be sure that we have identified the areas that are most critical to discuss. We want to attempt to be balanced with our inquiry, which are the questions that we ask, and advocacy, our support for the individual. And recall that you're the person in charge in all of these different feedback sessions. If you're the person giving the feedback and if you're the supervisor of the individual. So the closure rests with you. You will know when to close it, and you will know if perhaps it is best to stop before everything has been discussed and come back to another time. If the individual is defensive, if you feel that you're just not getting anywhere, then you may want to say, you know, I think it would be best if we both think about what has been said thus far, and let's come back after we've both have had a chance to think about this a little bit more, and maybe if we wait, it'll be a little bit more of a productive conversation. So know that that is your job, as the responsibility, and it's your responsibility to close the session when you feel it's needed. And if you've achieved what you want to achieve, then you'll agree to next steps. And again, we need to be careful about making attribution errors. We want to think about the symptom that we're observing, and ask questions in order to determine what the root cause of the situation is, not assume and begin an action plan before you have agreed about the cause of the issues that you're attempting to address. So next I want to share with you some questions for you to consider. Say it's the day before you're going to have a session with an employee. These are some questions for you to consider to be sure that you are prepared. So first of all, are you prepared? Do you feel good that you are ready to go into the interview? Can you make cause and effect linkages between the person's strengths and weaknesses and the results that you want them to attain? So this is something to really think about. It may be that you have identified terrific strengths and weaknesses, and but what you really want them to achieve. Can you measure that achievement, and are they linked to what you have identified as the strengths and weaknesses? And think about, as you're perhaps about to give a person news that their performance is not up to speed, it's not what you have expected them to perform over the last period of time. What have you done as their supervisor to assist, to help them in their performance, or what have you done to hurt their behavior? That self-reflection would be very helpful before you enter into the conversation, and hopefully you've asked yourself this before you're about to give the appraisal. And then in diagnosing performance problems, are you able to identify the root causes? And I know that I have expressed this quite a bit in this course, but many times people just assume things that are the wrong things. So those of you who have worked with Six Sigma and also quality, some of our quality programs, you know that the root cause is essential for changing a process or an individual's performance. So in diagnosing the issues, are you able to identify the root causes? And is there concurrence with you and the employee? And then as you think about this employee, is there a weakness or a limitation that is just not going to be able to be overcome? Now you will want to probe a little bit more into this, but in your mind, is it something that you feel is so critical it cannot be overcome? You may want to get input from your HR team, from your supervisor, or from others before you determine this, and you would probably also want to discuss it with the employee. But it is good to know if you feel that it is what we call in research a fatal error. It's something that we do not feel can be overcome, and therefore some action is going to need to be taken. And part of this action may have to be discipline. It may mean finding another job for the person. It may be terminating the individual, but it is something that is very wise to think about. And then which strengths that we've identified can we capitalize on for increased effectiveness? For example, if a person is very analytical, they're very good at diagnosing things, we could let them be the person who tracks their own performance or to diagnose the own root cause of their less than expected performance. So think about those strengths and see if we can use them for themselves in order to develop their performance. I think if you'll ask these questions and do so in a careful, reflective, mindful manner, you'll find it to your benefit. So here are some strategies for tough conversations. We want to be aware of a concept called restrictive framing. In one of the articles assigned this week by Manzoni shares some crucial advice. It's all about the importance of how we frame our thinking and how we present our alternatives to situations, how we problem solve, or how we communicate. Restrictive framing is similar to eras that we have discussed in attribution, which is assuming that the root cause of something is something that it is not, and being very firm in that thinking. But it's broader than that. Restrictive framing is a very narrow, binary, and that means one, or frozen approach to thinking. Do we know anyone like that? Usually we then manifest this thinking or communicate this thinking verbally. If we relate restrictive framing to performance feedback or coaching, the result of that communication would be that we initiate the conversation without considering alternative explanations or assume a win-lose outcome and rigidly maintain our assumptions during the conversation. So we don't think beyond what we have already decided in our mind to be true. For example, we would not want to begin with a binary framework such as that we must get the employee to commit to changing their behavior in this one meeting. Well, maybe it will take more than one, so go in with an open mind. Or saying to the person, you'll either change your performance or you'll be terminated. Well, there may be some things in between that we can do. There may be some other options. So open framing, contrary to restrictive framing, considers alternative explanations for problems and alternative options to where we can take the development. The article will share more, and I think you'll find that this may be one of your favorite articles or most helpful ones. And some students have told me that they've shared this article with others who they think that perhaps have been a little restrictive in their framing of and their communication. We also have some strategies that we want to review for evaluating and diagnosing performance problems. This has to do with our coaching processes, and I think most of you as leaders and managers will use coaching, and it's generally considered now one of the competencies that managers and leaders need to have. So we all need to continue to think about how we can be good coaches with our employees. So coaching needs to be as specific as possible. Usually we use the 360 feedback tool when we're coaching, and I do that in my coaching practice. I use the Center for Creative Leadership's their skill scope one in order to then pinpoint some specific areas we want the individual to address. And again, you know that my opinion on 360s is that we do not link it to rewards, but we link it only to developmental purposes. Take advantage of critical incidents. These are specific examples of outstanding behavior and also examples of areas or examples of behavior that needs to change. So critical incidents are one or the other, really good or really bad, that need to change. We need to identify specific developmental agendas. And so if you and the employee can settle on a few areas, this is your agenda that you want to work toward. And it usually has to do with leadership, communication, confronting conflict, relationship building, or whatever it is that is pertinent to this particular employee's job. And then we'll identify resources that are available. This is your job as a manager and a leader to help get things out of the way for the employees so they can be a very good maybe manager, supervisor, employee themselves. This could be a mentoring program, not with yourself, but maybe someone else. It could be a public speaking course. It could be other types of precise training that is needed and that you both agree upon. And finally, we want to be sure that we adapt our coaching style to the individual and not the other way around. You are there not to always coach in the very same way, but as we know, people are different. People have different motivations that we need to learn about. Different cultures are different. So you're the person who should change your style, not expect the individual to change for you. So I'll just go through these very quickly. I know that some of this is beginning to be a little repetitive, but it's a good reminder. So steps for coaching. Be receptive to the employee's needs, that they need to discuss things, and avoid presumptions on your part that may necessarily limit the conversation, such as you presume that it's going to be very quick and you're going to be able to get on to another meeting, so don't presume that you can do that. So take the time to have enough time in case the person needs to discuss more than you feel that they needed to discuss. So be receptive to that. Listen with your eyes on the person. So maintain eye contact. We want to we want to be observant of the individual's body language to see if they're nervous, if they're defensive, or if they're being open. Also, by looking the person in the eye, they know that we are concentrating solely on them and that we are engaging in totally our attention in what they are saying to us. This is the time for you to set aside everything else and focus on them. Be in the moment, give them your time and attention. This leads to the next one, which is do not multitask, even if that multitasking is only going on in your mind. So you put away your phone, your laptop, and I mean it when I say put it away. I don't mean just turning it off, but put it out of sight. So it will not even so you'll not even be tempted to look at it. So also find a dedicated space. In this graphic, it's not as private as we'd like to be. You see some people waiting outside, but we would want it to be as private as possible, as away from distractions. And if you have people you know that may give you a tug to finish up the meeting, be sure that you let them know that you need to spend time with this employee so you can have a good coaching session. And then finally, to demonstrate empathy. And I think you know that empathy means that we're putting ourselves in the other person's shoes. So this is not only to comprehend the person's point of view, but also to experience their emotions. That's why we want to focus our attention on them. Listen to their words. Listen how they're framing things. Looking at their facial expression. Look for whether they've pushed back from the desk or gotten closer to it, whether they're leaning in or leaning back. All of the things that I think you already know about body language. So put those good skills and that good knowledge you have to use. And now, 5 steps to behavior change. This article that I've given you for the week, the Gary Latham article, speaks about how goals galvanize and excite people. And they give employees a cause that they can rally around and work toward. And they link individuals to the organizational goals, which we know is vertical alignment. So we want, again, to have specific goals. We want to link rewards to that goal attainment. It doesn't have to be monetary. It can be some of the many other things that you already know about. We want to show our leadership in support of the individual through consistent messages. So we have to be consistent in what we praise. And we want to show appreciation. We want to give recognition. Again, we know that not everyone likes public recognition, and so we need to think about the person and think about what is best for them. Remember that example I gave about the housekeeper having dinner with the GM? We want to be sure it's something that they really want. We want to minimize group think, and I think you know what this means. It means that if you're working in a team, or if you have a group of individuals, sometimes they can begin to think alike and feel pressure if they do not think like the others or behave like the others. So we want to encourage dissent when needed, and again the emphasis is on when needed. Not everyone needs to perform or think in the same way, particularly when they're on teams. You bring individual expertise, so we want to minimize that group thing. So the goals need to be different for each person, as well as maybe some team goals or organizational goals. And then ensure that the measurement system is aligned with the goals. We've talked a lot about being sure that this goes back to the room's expectancy theory. We want to be sure that we have a measurement system that is aligned with the goals. So we don't want to measure something that we're not expecting. I think you'll enjoy that article. I like it. And then another one that I think that you'll like is The Power of Small Wins. This is the article that I've given you for the week, which is the Abali and Kramer, The Power of Small Wins. And it is, I've also given you a short video with one of the authors speaking. It's a YouTube video, I believe, and it shares just an excerpt, but a very important premise of how small wins can lead to larger ones when a person is progressing. This is similar to some of the change process theory in leadership, that we need to celebrate those small wins and those small changes, because the small wins and small changes can lead to larger ones. And the progress loop that is described is we need to support those people who report to us. We need to remove obstacles for them, provide needed resources, promote clear goals, and we do this through getting feedback, and then encourage the progress of the small wins. And the article talks about every day being able to go home thinking that you've done something toward achieving the goal. And you, if you have the time, you can chat with employees and see what they have done that day that can be considered a small win, and show that appreciation, and share how the work that they're doing is meaningful to you, meaningful to others in the organization, meaningful to the organization at large. Okay, we've talked a lot about SMART goals, and you probably have used them in your organization or maybe in your personal lives. So since we have a lot of references to this, I think you know what specific goals are that are SMART goals. So specific ones are well defined. It's clear to anyone who reads it what it is you're trying to achieve. Measurable. We want it to be measurable so that we know when we have gained success. So how are we going to know that we have reached success? They do need to be achievable. So you need to have agreement that indeed this is something that can be done in the amount of time that has been allotted for it. Sometimes people set goals that are so lofty they're never going to be able to do it in the time that has been allocated. And please know that goals are much more attainable if you can break it down into steps. Each step can be one that moves us a little bit closer to that goal. If we want to lose 100 pounds, it can be overwhelming if we think about that much. So if we can instead have specific goals in between, then we might be able to reach that 100 pounds. And being relevant and realistic, goals that are aligned with the current task and projects, and focus in one defined area. And we need there to include the expected result. So they need to be relevant to the job that we're doing. It doesn't need to be something that is unrelated. It could be something that might help us with a promotion, but whatever it is, it needs to be related to what we're doing, or perhaps for the next promotion, and time framed. So we need to set out a timeline, and we need to be sure that we allow enough time for the goal to be achieved. Not too much time, not too little time, but the right amount. And you'll know that we can make SMART goals even smarter when we add evaluation at the end. So at the end of the allotted time, we evaluate, we use those good measurements, and we ask ourselves, have we achieved the results? And if the answer is yes, we can form a new goal. If the answer is, well, not completely, then we can readjust and keep the same goal, but readjust and make a new plan. So that makes a SMART goal even smarter. I have covered many of the articles in this in this presentation, so it's given you a highlight of some of our readings for the week, and most all of them. I think I didn't cover one, but here are the readings, and I do know that I've given you a lot this week. So if you feel that there are too many, if it's overwhelming, then just scan them, just take a brief look at them. I've already given you an introduction, but just take a look and then go back and read carefully those that are most of interest to you. You can always come back to them, but I've selected these, and you will use some of them, some of the frameworks in the Dorsey Gallagher assignment. So take a look at the ones you feel are most important. The first one, becoming a better coach, is optional. That is particularly good if you want to think about your skills as being a coach and want to learn a little bit more. So it's optional, but I think you'll find it helpful if you read it at some point. The second one, formal performance appraisals, improving results through feedback. You began this one in week 1 of the course, and you may have read the entire thing then. If you haven't, I recommend you go back to doing it. One that most students enjoy and find helpful is handling problem employees, motivating or letting go. Many in the organization, I think, could benefit from reviewing this article, and many students have shared with me that they have given this to some of the leaders in their organization, leaders beyond themselves, because they feel that sometimes we keep employees way too long when they're not performing. The last one on the left-hand side of the chart is the Dorsey Gallagher case study that you'll use. Then on the right hand side, I've already introduced the power of small wins, which is a good model to follow. I feel it's similar to John Cotter's change model, where he recommends that we celebrate small wins that will lead to larger or celebrate small changes that will lead to large changes. And I've given you the video as well as the article. The Cialdini article, Harnessing the Science of Persuasion. This is a really good reminder of how we can build on certain principles that are reviewed in the article, such as people like those who like them. So we can show that we like another person and they in return may like us back. People repay in kind. So if we do a favor for someone, then they will probably do a favor for us. People follow the lead of others who are similar to us. People align when the commitment to what it is that needs to be done is really clear. Think about the NASA example and everyone being really clear what their purpose at NASA was, to get someone on the moon. People defer to experts. This is why we need to, not in a boastful way, but in an informative way, let individuals know of our expertise. They may not know it, and then people then will defer to that expertise. And then there's the principle of scarcity, which means that people generally want more of something that they feel that they can't have, or that is not as available as they would like for it to be. If there's an abundance of it, then they're not as motivated. So the principle of scarcity is something that we could use to our advantage. So the article shares how to maximize all 6 of these principles, and it gives good applications of each one. So I think you'll enjoy that. The Duran article was one of the first to talk about SMART goals, and I know that many of you know SMART goals extremely well, so you may or may not need to read that article. The Latham one I've already highlighted, which talks about goal setting, a 5-step approach to behavior change. And then the Manzoni one, which I mentioned, a better way to deliver bad news. I think this one will be particularly helpful to you. It offers excellent information about the concepts of restrictive framing, of open framing, and reframing. Many times if an employee says something to us, we can turn it around and put it into a frame that is more relevant to their development. I'll just let you read the article to see some examples of that. I find the practices to be extremely helpful for turning potentially defensive conversations, even in our private lives, for changing those conversations around to ones that are really beneficial. The article also describes one of the errors that all seem to make, and it's the error that we have talked about a lot, the error of attribution, thinking that the cause of a problem or issue is one thing when it's really something else. Students have also shared this article with individuals in their organizations. And again, if you feel overwhelmed by all of this reading material that I've given you for the week, just take a brief look at them and concentrate on the concepts and the articles that you're most interested in reading. By listening to this presentation, you've already gotten some of the key concepts. So looking ahead to next week. Next week you will design a PowerPoint presentation once again about performance management systems and performance appraisals best practices. You'll use a case study for an entire organization. This week you're concentrating on delivering individual feedback. Next week we again pull it all together at the systems level or the organization level, and you will assess the performance management program that has been put in place in an organization called Vitality Healthcare Enterprises, and it's a case study that's in your Harvard Business Publishing course pack. You this time will be you'll take on the role of a new Vice President of Human Resources who wants to do a good job in a presentation to the Board of Directors. So you will evaluate what's happening at Vitality Healthcare Enterprises. You will put your recommendations into your presentation, and it's going to be a little bit out of the norm. So your presentation will be due on Thursday midnight. So a heads up, Thursday midnight, and it will, however, serve as your discussion questions in addition to serving as your assignment 4. So it's just one presentation, and you'll submit it to the discussion forum by Thursday night, midnight, and you will also put it in your assignments Dropbox by Thursday night. We're going to once again share the presentation with the class so you can benefit from the terrific assessment and recommendations. But going back to this week, we will first go back to the Darcy Gallagher interview or discussion, and you'll review all of the reading material or that you find most interesting to prepare for that interview, and you will share your strategy in a memo of record, and the assignments instructions will tell you a little bit more about that, but you'll put in writing your strategy of how you will approach the feedback or coaching session with Darcy. I hope you enjoy that activity. I think it'll bring a lot of what we have been reading about to real life, and then you'll be able to perhaps apply the same principles at work or in your private life should you have the need. So again, it's just one it's just this one assignment for this week, and it's your feedback session with Darcy Gallagher. So I hope you enjoy.